This will be an explanation of the options available in the Lacerte tax program. This includes individual user options and the master options. Configuring individual and master options. The Lacerte tax program allows you to customize the viewing and printing of tax and client-related information. We will cover options and master options, laptops connected versus not connected to the network, critical options. Options versus master options. It's important to understand the difference between the individual options and the master options. The individual options, or options, are set for a specific user on each computer. The master options are set by an admin and are shared to each user and only apply in a network installation. Some individual options, such as the Fonts and Colors tab and the Display tab, are not part of the master options. These two tabs are the type of an option that would be a user-by-user preference. And there is a tab in the master options that's not part of the individual options, the Trustee Rights tab. It's important to understand that the master options are not the individual user options. An individual user could modify their options, and those options could be different than what is in the master options. The Office Administrator can control this by using a function in the master options called Trustee Rights to limit the ability of the individual user to modify their options. This is how you can control what the individual options will be. Let's look to see how to set up those individual options and the master options. I'm going to demonstrate the master options first, then we'll look at the individual user options. The master options can be thought of as a template. This template is used to create the individual user options when the user opens the program for the first time. When a user opens the tax program for the first time, there is no individual option file for that user, and the program uses the master options as a template to create the individual user options. If a user opens Lacerte before the master option adjustments have been made, their individual user option file has already been created and it will not be overwritten. I'll speak more about correcting this issue in just a very few minutes. To get to the master options, open the program and select Settings, then Master Options. While in the master options, let's say I want to change the text style. This option affects the capitalization of the data entered on the tax return. If I want both upper and lower case, I would leave this option to mixed case. If I want to force all of the data on the return to be in all caps, I can change this to uppercase. In this scenario, that's what I want, the data to be printed in all caps, so I'll select that option. When I click OK, I'll be presented with this window. There are two choices on this window, Reset All Options and Current Changes Only. If I select Reset All Options, the program will completely overwrite the individual user options, effectively cloning the individual options to be what the master options are. In the scenario where the user opens the program before the master options are set, this would be the way to completely overwrite the individual options and replace them with whatever is in the master options. If you select Current Changes Only, only the change you made in the master options will be pushed to the individual options. In this case, the mixed case selection I made. Whenever a change is made to the master options for them to update the individual user options, no others can be in the program. If someone is in the program when we make the master option change, that user's options will not be modified. There is a message indicating this when you make a master option change, so when you select OK, you are given a message in that program and the program will then be shut down. Laptops disconnected from the network. There may be times when a laptop is removed from the network, possibly to go to a client site. When you open Lacerte outside of the office, the network drive will not be available. In this case, when you open the program, you will see this message. The program will use a local version of the options. Once the laptop is back in the office, connected to the network, the program will automatically detect the network and change the option path back to the network option path. An important thing to understand is that when the laptop is not connected to the network, where the data is located, you will not have access to that data. If you need a client file while the laptop is not connected to the network, you will need to make a backup of that client file to the laptop's hard drive. Backing up and restoring clients are covered in a separate training module. Critical options. There are more options than we will have time to cover in this presentation, but I want to show you some of the critical options that will have an impact on the output of the program. We're going to look at the Setup tab, the Status tab, the Items to Print tab, the Tax Return tab, the Prepare Information tab, and the Trustee Rights tab. Let's go into the options and look at the Setup tab. In Lacerte, go to Settings and then Options. This is the Setup tab. One thing to note here is the data path. This is the path to the location where the data is being stored. If you're in a network environment, this path should be pointing to the same location for all the computers to see the same data. This is the default letter and the default invoice section. This number indicates which letter or invoice is to be used by default. The letter and the invoice details are discussed in a separate course, but this is the option where the selection of which letter and invoice to be used would be made. Here's the printer selection. By default, this is set to the default Windows printer. You can change this to whatever printer you prefer. Here's the option for showing the Help Me pane. That's the pane at the bottom of the program where the help and the live community are located. If you find yourself closing that pane every time you open the program, you might consider selecting No on this option. I'll select Complete Return Printer to move to that section. The Complete Return options are where you can select the default printing for each copy. When you print a tax return, there are options on that print window that these options will be set to as default. For an example, my Complete Return Printer, I have one copy for the Prepare Review and none for the other copies. Let's look at the options and the print windows together. From the previous slide, you see that my options say one copy for the Prepare Return copy. I've also set the PDF print option to create a PDF of the client copy. When we look at the print window, these options correspond to these parts of the print window. This is the one copy option, then the other copies have none, and that is indicated by these boxes not being selected. The box selected for PDF in the client copy is selected because of the option in the Complete Return PDF section. Note that the other PDF boxes in the other copies are not selected. These options are just the default print options. When you print a return, you can change these print options on the fly, but the selections seen when you open the print window are set by using these options. Let's go back into the program and look at the Status tab. The Status tab is where you can create statuses to help track clients' progress through your preparation process. We have 5 statuses by default, and you can add 15 more if needed. Let's say I want a new status called Has Not Paid. I'll select a blank status and then select Modify. Now I will enter the phrase Has Not Paid and select OK. Now I will OK out of the options. As a quick sidebar, the way to change a status is to highlight a client, then select the client status icon on the toolbar, or the keyboard shortcut is F4. This is the status window. To change a status, use this drop-down and select the status needed. When I OK this window, we can now see that that status is changed. Fonts and colors. This is an option that's not in the master options. This is a user preference and is set by the individual user. The client list allows you to change the font used when looking at the client list. You have the choice of any font installed on your computer, but I would suggest an easily read font, very plain. If you use something fancier, you may have trouble reading it. An example of a less than optimal font might be the French script. Let's look at what that looks like. As you can see, this is not easy to read. Let's put this back to our defaults. You can also adjust the size of the font for the client list here. The alternate line shading is an option to highlight every other client in the client list. If you choose this option, please be sure to choose a color that's neutral. If you choose a color that's too bright or dark, the list can be distracting. To change the color, select this button to get the color palette. And then first I'm going to choose a bright color, then click OK in the options. This is the result. To me, I think this is too bright and distracting, so let's go back into the options and change that to a more neutral color. This is something I think that will help me without being too distracting. This next section is where you can modify the interactive input. The interactive input is where you enter data. My same word of caution when selecting a font applies here as well. Use something plain and simple. The highlight color is an option that highlights the field where your cursor is located. Let me change this to a color and then let's look at this result. You can see wherever my cursor is located, the text of the field is now that color. This allows me to easily see where my cursor is located. Now back in the options, the other 2 options in that section indicate what color the text of the entered data will be. By default, data you enter manually will be in blue, and any data that's imported will be black. You can adjust these colors to your preference to easily identify the data source, either data entered manually by the user, contrasted with the data that was imported from some outside source. The Items to Print tab is where you select the options for printing letters and other supporting documentation and worksheets for each copy. Remember, when we looked at the print options, there are multiple copies that can be printed. So on the left column, each of these copies are shown. To adjust a specific copy, select that copy on the left and make those adjustments. An example of an adjustment you might make is to remove the supporting worksheet. sheets from a client copy. Select Client on the left, then I can deselect specific items. Let's say I do not want to print the MFS MFJ worksheet when I print the client copy. Simply deselect the box next to that item, and deselecting some of the items from printing can save you lots of paper and time. Remember, each copy shown has its own list of items to print that can be modified. There are a lot of options in the Tax Return tab. Really too many to look at in detail here, but I wanted to highlight a few of these options. The option Text Style is the option that controls whether or not the tax return is printed in all caps or if it's in mixed case. By default, it is set to mixed case, so if you prefer the return to print in all caps, select the option Uppercase. Now when I print the return, no matter what the case of the letters I entered into the detail, the return will now be printed in all uppercase. The computer-generated pins option is set to yes by default. What that means is that when you create a return, the taxpayer pin will automatically be filled in. That would save you the time and trouble of entering that pin for every client. The preparer name on the 1040 option indicates whether or not the preparer name is printed on the return. Some preparers want the name to be printed, and they would then just sign above the printed name. Some preparers want nothing printed in the preparer name field and use that as a final check to verify that they've reviewed the return. The IRS in most states accept the printed preparer name as a signature, so you need to think of the ramifications of this option. Technically speaking, when you print a return for the preparer name in there, the return is effectively signed by the preparer, so please consider this when looking at this option. The Preparers tab. This tab is located in both the individual user options and the master options, and it does not matter which you choose to make the modification to this tab, both will have the same effect. This is where you would enter the preparer information. When you open the program the first time, you are presented with an e-file setup page. On that page are fields for adding one preparer and the e-fin. But if you have more than one preparer in the office, you will need to open the options and add the other preparers. This is where you enter the preparer name, P10, ERO pin, and other details. So highlight a slot and select Modify, then enter the name and the other pertinent information for the preparer, and then select OK. Now that we've entered the preparer information, I would like to revisit the Setup tab. There's an option on the Setup tab for the new client default preparer. By default, this is set to 0. That means that when we create a new client, there will not be a preparer associated with that client file. If there's a preparer in the office that would be the default preparer, you can select the number of the preparer here. Then, moving forward, any new client created will have that preparer as the preparer of the return. The preparer can be changed at any time by changing the preparer name on screen 1. This is just a default preparer option. Trustee Rights. The next option I want to discuss is in the Master Options. The Trustee Rights tab is only in the Master Options. This tab is where you can limit users from some program functionality. These are the details of what each trustee right controls. This is from a knowledge base article available to you by searching the phrase Setting Trustee Rights. I want to call out just a few of the trustee rights options. Early in this course, I described a situation where the individual user options can be changed and circumvented the master options. In the Trustee Rights tab, there is an option, Adjust User Options. If I deselect that box, the user will no longer be able to modify the individual user options. This would prevent changes at the individual user option level. There's also an e-file option that can be deselected. If I uncheck this box, the user will not be able to e-file. Please review the knowledge base article for the details of these options. That concludes this presentation. You should now be able to modify the options and master options to control the look and feel and the functionality of the tax program.